Tennis has a mythology problem. Somewhere in the collective imagination, the sport exists as a pristine, white-glove affair where serious athletes do serious things while serious spectators sit in serious silence. Fashion in this version of tennis is an intruder. Players who dress with intention get accused of vanity, of disrespecting tradition, of not understanding what the sport is truly about. Which is why every time Naomi Osaka walks into a court in something extraordinary, the same complaints arrive on schedule, calling her everything from too much, attention-seeking, disrespectful, more interested in fashion than in tennis, trying to make the game all about her. The problem with this criticism isn't that it's just unfair to Osaka, but that it requires forgetting almost the entire history of the sport. Tennis was never corrupted by fashion. I hate to break it to some of you. It was born in it. Long before Osaka, players were turning heads, starting trends, scandalizing traditionalists, collaborating with designers, and changing the way the world literally dressed. So this isn't really a story about whether fashion belongs in tennis, because history has settled that argument more than a century ago. It's about why people keep acting as though it hasn't. Because once you look at the record, Osaka's critics stop looking like guardians of tradition and start looking like the latest entry in a very long, embarrassing line of people history has already proven wrong. Tennis fans, let us discuss. Ello Bandannas, Khumo, Markham here, and welcome back to my channel where people watch me speak about whatever crosses my mind, and I'm okay with that. I've been wanting to make a tennis-related video for so long, so today we're talking all things tennis fashion. To understand how this became the most stylish sport, you have to meet it where it began, all the way back in 12th century. We're not going to go that far back. Let us fast forward to the summer of 1877 at the All England Croquet and Lawn Tennis Club. During this era, tennis wasn't a sport that people changed clothes to play, but a social event that happened to involve a racket. So we saw the men playing in that first Wimbledon wear flannel trousers, long sleeve shirts, starched collars, and ties. The women, joining in 1884, arrived at the net in full-length skirts, bone corsets, and long sleeve blouses that covered every inch of the arm. Clothes that restricted their every movement, but worn anyway, as Victorian respectability really did not give them much of a choice. Yet somehow people learned to serve in these clothes, they learned to volley in them, they learned to sprint across grass too. And because tennis is a sport where you're fixated on the individual player for hours, everyone understood that the court sort of functioned like a stage too. I mean, literally everything about a player is visible and examined. The all-white dress code invoked today as the sport's sacred, fashion-free tradition was born from this specific anxiety. In Victorian England, a woman's visible sweat was considered obscene, not because it indicated the athletic exertion which men were allowed to perform, but because it suggested bodily access, loss of control, a body that leaked, utterly scandalous. As a woman, how dare you be human? So white clothing helped conceal that. But the then unspoken rule was not entirely about hiding sweat stains. It was also about maintaining the optics of the upper class, to signal who could afford to get their white clothes dirty without caring about how expensive it was to keep them clean. The sport was popularized inside an aesthetic framework and has never left it. What followed since was a century-long negotiation between self-expression and institutions trying to contain it. The negotiation's first great turning point was Suzanne Lenglen at Wimbledon 1919. Nicknamed Le Divine, the diva arrived in a low-neck short-sleeve dress with a calf-length pleated skirt, silk stockings rolled to the knee, and a floppy hat over cropped hair. By the standards of the day, she had essentially arrived in the nude. In fact, the British press called her indecent. And then you know what she did? She won. Yeah, and she kept winning. In fact, she was world number one for years, with everything she wore becoming a trend. Her silk headband, designed with the Parisian couturier Jean Pateau, set off a craze so strong enough that Vogue ran an editorial on her style. Her contemporary Elizabeth Ryan later said that every woman on tour should literally thank Suzanne for freeing them from the tyranny of corsets. But what critics missed then was that a shortened hem was more than just about style. It was about velocity too. A full skirt at ankle length catches mid-swing. A calf-length hem moves. That single decision to shorten gave Lenglen not just a fun look, but speed and agility, because fashion and function are never separate. A couturier, a headband, and bare forearms did what decades of sporting tradition hadn't. They had physically freed women's bodies to play the game properly. This is what fashion on the court has always done at its most powerful. It has liberated players to be themselves, and in doing so, literally liberated the sport itself. Pateau and Lenglen were so interwoven that their partnership essentially created the template for athlete fashion house collaborations that still define the sport today. Behind many of the incredible moments we would see off the set, one recurring figure, Ted Tingling, tennis's first and only couturier in residence. As a teenager in Nice, Tingling served as Lenglen's line umpire, close enough to watch her turn a hemline into an international incident. He then spent the next half-century doing on purpose what she had done instinctively, designing not costumes handed down by a sponsor, but garments built around one woman's particular body, her temperament, but most importantly, her game. In 1949, he dressed Gussie Moran for Wimbledon in a skirt that revealed lace-trimmed knickers underneath, a look so scandalous that photographers reportedly lay on the grass to shoot up her skirt mid-serve. Tingling was quietly frozen out of the tournament for 3 decades over it, but he kept designing anyway, dressing legends like Billie Jean King, Maria Bueno, Virginia Wade, Chris Evert, and Martina Navratilova, outfitting champions across 5 different decades and proving longer and more consistently than any single player could that the court doubled as an atelier. Tennis's most democratic export followed a decade later. Rene Lacoste, nicknamed the Crocodile for the ruthlessness of his play, reportedly cut the sleeves off his shirt in 1929 for freedom of movement, then built an entire brand around the resulting peak polo shirt, with his crocodile emblem added in 1933. It is now one of the most reproduced garments in fashion history, worn from prep culture to hip-hop to the runway. Its British cousin, Fred Perry's tipped polo, launched in 1952 and became the uniform of mod subculture, punk, and Britpop. First worn on the court, then absorbed so completely into working class cool that most people who wear it have never once connected it to tennis. The 1970s and 80s had their own aesthetic wars, fought largely in Italian sportswear. When Bjorn Borg signed with the Italian brand Fila in 1974, he became the embodiment of a certain kind of effortless Nordic cool and the sharp-lined color block designs. Meanwhile, John McEnroe, the fire to Borg's ice, wore Sergio Tacchini, whose bold polos and track design match McEnroe's own spectacular volatility. Chris Evert, the third great name of that era, wore Ellis, whose half-and-half color block tracksuits became defining artifacts of 1980s tennis fashion. Together, these 3 players and their Italian brands constitute one of the richest fashion moments in the sport's history, and in a decade when people talk about nostalgia for tennis's aesthetic golden age, this is largely the era that they are referring to. Nobody was more reviled for their clothes or more thoroughly vindicated by time than Andre. I'm talking neon sets. I'm talking denim shorts at the 1988 US Open, my favorite look of his, spandex, a mullet that he later admitted was a wig. This man boycotted Wimbledon from 1988 to 1990 rather than wear its whites, essentially called tennis clothes boring, and then spent a decade proving that they don't have to be. And while the press mocked him for this, he won 8 Grand Slams anyway, and is now one of the greatest players who ever lived. His rebellion literally helped decide what players were allowed to look like. And of course, we have to talk about my girls, the Williams sisters, who didn't just serve looks, but brought a visual vocabulary drawn from Black American style and an explicit refusal to disappear into whiteness. My girls' beaded braids drew institutional scrutiny on debut. Okay, you just knew they were going to be the American problem Beyonce was singing about on Renaissance. Serena wore denim skirts with studded tank tops. She wore a Puma catsuit before any federation thought to object. She wore a leather jacket like she was walking into the Matrix. She wore a black catsuit at the 2018 French Open that she called Wakanda-inspired, that Nike designed specifically to help manage the blood clots she had developed after giving birth. The French Tennis Federation president, Bernard, told Tennis Magazine that it will no longer be accepted and one must respect the game and the place. Okay. Whatever that means. Anyway, instead of retreating to a boring kit, Serena continued to serve and gave us that cool tutu from the Off-White Queen collection at the 2018 US Open weeks after the ban. How can you not say mother? And we simply cannot talk about stylish tennis icons and not mention my man, okay, arguably my GOAT, okay, Roger Federer, whose relationship with fashion is literally the gold standard everything in men's tennis gets measured against. Working with Nike through a partnership that treated him as a luxury brand rather than an athlete, Federer developed a signature court aesthetic of bespoke, tailored elegance. His Wimbledon entrance cardigans adorned with the RF monogram and numerals recording his title count was such objects of desire that one literally sold for £100,000 at Christie's. And I, Khumo Markham, hereby declare in a sound state of mind that I will do whoever it takes to get my hands on one of those cardigans. And I do sign NDAs. In 7 US Open, he wore a complete head-to-toe all-black ensemble of such severity that American press nicknamed him Darth Federer and played the Imperial March from Star Wars before his matches. This man sat front row at fashion weeks. He has won GQ's Most Stylish Man of the Decade in 2019. He signed a $300 million deal with Uniqlo in 2018 and debuted a black tie-inspired Stan collar look at the US Open the following year. He has dressed for tennis the way a man dresses for an opening night, with ceremony, with personal meaning, and an acute awareness that being watched is itself a part of what he was doing. Federer was celebrated for all of this unconditionally and across every tennis publication and mainstream media outlet in existence. We will return to why this matters. But here's where the record stops being persuasive and becomes a little bit, I'd argue, overwhelming, because tennis hasn't just tolerated fashion or occasionally produced a stylish player. It has been one of the most productive fashion engines of the last century. We just talked about the polo shirt born from Lacoste's need to move on the French court in 1929, and now it's one of the most ubiquitous garments on the planet. The Adidas Stan Smith, named for a 3-time US clay court champion, is one of the best-selling sneakers ever made. The tennis skirt Lenglen fought to shorten in 1919 has really never left fashion. It resurfaces every decade. Most recently as Miu Miu's 2022 runway statement, which helped really set off the tennis cool wave and appeared within a single season at every price point from luxury boutique to fast fashion. And of course, Ralph Lauren, who built an entire brand universe around the fantasy of a life that revolves around the court, from the polo to the cable knit sweater to the cardigan tied around the shoulder. The internet calls that vision, which he's been selling since 1967, old money, but really it's just a tennis trend wearing a different name. And tennis inspires not just what people wear, but what they aspire to wear. No way more than in watches. Rolex sits at the exact intersection of sports status and aesthetics tennis trades on. Federer wasn't just a Rolex ambassador. For nearly 2 decades, he was part of the visual language of victory itself. Win the final, change into the watch, lift the trophy. The sequence became a ritual, and that ritual was iconic. Every time that fine man lifted a trophy, there was a sickening timepiece on his wrist. I'd even argue that the relationship runs deeper than sponsorship, because Rolex is laced through the slams and generations of ambassadors before and after Federer, because tennis and luxury watchmaking trade on the same values of precision, of heritage, of elegance. So together they produce the perfect aspirational fashion vocabulary. I also think about Rafa Nadal and Richard Mille too, and how they kind of elevated that vocabulary. Richard Mille watches cost what some people's houses do, and yet Nadal was literally playing with them on. This man had RM27s on his wrist through 5-set clay wars, through the sweat and the friction and the literal violence of professional tennis, through conditions that would destroy most luxury objects, and Richard Mille was engineered for exactly that. They built watches for Nadal's game. Watches with shock-resistant movements, ceramic components that wouldn't crack under the stress of his serves, designs that could withstand the centrifugal forces of his forehand rotation. Watches literally inspired by F1 engineering because they understood that they had to be uncompromising as his play. That's what I think made the relationship aspirational, not just the price, but the idea that your tools do not have to be separate from your performance. You don't have to choose between looking elegant and performing at your absolute highest level. Nadal wore precision and beauty simultaneously. The watch stayed on through every point because it was built to be there. That integration of function and form being inseparable is what luxury should mean. Numerous fashion houses understand this too, consistently drawing inspiration from the sport. Gucci, under the creative director Sabato De Sarno, and with world number 1 Yannick Sinner signed as a global brand ambassador, had Sinner carrying a custom Gucci duffel bag to tournaments since 2023, single-handedly making the courtside luggage a fashion object. And the 2026 campaign together, oh, they had me gagging. This is the first time I've ever admitted to myself that maybe I do find Yannick Sinner hot. Jacques Mus dropped tennis-inspired pieces across multiple collections. Tom Brown, whose aesthetic has always hovered in the space between sport and ceremony, put tennis racket embroidery on evening wear. Brunello Cucinelli, the luxury brand most associated with billionaires doing nothing expensively, launched an entire dedicated tennis capsule for spring-summer 2024. Sporty and Rich collaborated with Lacoste on a 22-piece collection collection, transporting its wearer to a fantasy French Riviera via 1970s and 80s archival Lacoste silhouettes. Casablanca, the luxury label whose entire identity is built around the aesthetics of leisure and the country club, launched its first official tennis racket in 2023, developed by Mad Paris and assembled in the UK. And we see this with so many other houses. The sport is being studied, it's being referenced, it's been collaborated with and turned into product at every level of the fashion industry simultaneously. And how could I not mention what happened in the spring of 2024 when we witnessed the most insane tennis-inspired press tour run with Zendaya for Luca Guadagnino's challenges? At the Aussie premiere, Zendaya stunned the tour in a sparkling Nueva gown designed by Jonathan Anderson, who costumed the film with a tennis player and ball motif. In Rome, she wore a custom Loewe Diamante mini dress paired with white stiletto pumps designed by Jonathan Anderson again, with a razor-sharp needle heel piercing through a bright yellow tennis ball. In LA, a Celia halterneck gown in neon chartreuse was cinched at the midriff by an actual tennis ball. In London, a white sequin Tom Brown gown embroidered with tiny tennis rackets from collar to hem, and so many more. Each look was a chapter, and together they constituted a thesis that tennis is glamour, glamour is tennis, and the two have never been separate. The entire tour felt like a love letter to the aesthetic language of the sport, filtered through the most fashion literate press tour we've seen in recent memory. And the results were measurable and immediate. Tennis style in online posts grew by 80% between March and April 2024, according to tracking from Instagram analytics account Data But Make It Fashion. Searches for tennis skirts and polo shirts on resale platform Depop surged over 50%. The term tennis core accumulated hundreds of millions of TikTok views. The Loewe tennis ball heels became so coveted that handcrafted replicas were spotted at Wimbledon that summer and continued appearing at the 2026 championships. A single press tour had helped generate a global trend cycle. And then consider what happened at the 94th Academy Awards 2 years before that, in 2022, when tennis arrived on Hollywood's most glamorous stage. Beyonce opening the broadcast with a performance of Be Alive on the actual tennis court in Compton, where the sisters grew up, in a custom neon yellow mini gown designed by David Khumo with glamorous feather trimming, a diamond encrusted gala bracelet, and matching gloves. Her dancers looked incredible too. This is one of the sport's greatest cultural exports and arguably its most successful one, which makes the story of how tennis fashion got flattened from the 1990s onwards worth examining, because it explains where we are now and why the current renaissance matters. When Nike, Adidas, Reebok, and all the other brands took over outfitting professional players in the late 80s and 90s, they brought performance technology and homogenization in the same package. Suddenly, the tour wore variations on one template: polo, skirt or shorts, matching trainers, all in the brand's seasonal colorway. The era of dressmakers like Ted, who designed for decades around one woman's body and temperament and game, gave way to catalog dressing. Steffi Graf won 7 Wimbledon titles in breezy t-shirts and baggy spray jackets. Practical? Yes, yet largely interchangeable with everybody else on tour that season. That's the baseline today's fashion-forward players are trying to depart from. And it's a recent baseline, okay? Not the ancient tradition critics of Osaka invoke whenever they demand a return to the way things were always done. The playing kit is maybe 30 years old, okay? The tradition of using the court for self-expression is over 100. The playing kit is basically a corporate interlude, and the players moving past it aren't revolutionaries breaking with the past, they're restorationists. Which makes today's number 1 and real number 2 somewhat of a puzzle. Yannick Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz have combined to win most of the last several majors between them, and on court, both dress in what I can only describe as uninspired. I mean, both of these men are sponsored by Nike. The same Nike that had Maria Sharapova in that iconic tuxedo-inspired outfit at the 2008 Wimbledon. A company that clearly knows how to make a player look like an event, but has simply chosen to not spend that effort on the 2 men most likely to define this era of tennis. Because generally speaking, what jaw-dropping looks has either one of them given us? I'll wait. And it's happening to the women too. As I'm filming this, Sabalenka just posted her US Open kit, and girl, they have her going out in an unhemmed mesh dress that's an ugly version of her Roland Garros look. And this is the era that you'll seriously want to defend. I was having a laugh the other day watching a video of Ben Shelton having a little banter with a commentator who made a comment about his outfit. And I just realized that anytime we say a player looks good now, we're basically talking about kit colors and how they complement court surfaces. How boring is that? And this is not evidence that fashion and elite tennis have become incompatible. It's evidence that the corporate interlude that Graf played through in the 90s has never fully left. In fact, it's just moved on to different players. So if the record showing how incredible players used to look before is this overwhelming, why does a backlash exist at all? Why does Fritz walking onto Wimbledon's #1 court in an ivory Hugo Boss suit get read as turning tennis into a fashion show, while Federer's cream cardigans were called timeless and elegant? Why is Osaka's jellyfish gown classless? Why do people make fun of Novak looking like a private school pupil in an ill-fitting white Lacoste blazer? Actually, nobody said that last one. I just wanted to whack him a little bit. Okay. But the answer isn't in the sport, it's in the audience. The professionalization of fandom through social media, through fantasy sport, through analytics, through parasocial tribalism has produced a fan who believes sport exists purely for competitive observation and that anything else is noise. Stick to sports gets applied to politics, it gets applied to philanthropy and clothing alike, and it has nothing to do with the sport's actual history. It's a media culture that has convinced a demographic that the enjoyment of competition is the sport's highest purpose, and anything complicating that is imposition. Social media just makes this louder than it deserves to be. A complaint that once stayed between two people at a pub now reaches hundreds of people and gets mistaken for consensus. The traditional tennis that critics invoke isn't the sport's actual history. It's the specific 30-year window they grew up watching and mistaken for the whole of it. They think they're defending a 150-year tradition. They're not. Okay, y'all are defending a marketing catalog that started in the 1990s. Which brings us back to Osaka as one of the most necessary players on tour today. Her fashion identity on court draws a layered inheritance: Japanese, Haitian, and American. At the 2024 US Open, a custom Nike collection with ambitious on. At the 2025 French Open, a Sailor Moon inspired kit with a Sakura theme she helped design. At the 2026 Australian Open, a Robert One jellyfish kit paired with a butterfly hat, referencing a moment in 2021 when she gently moved a butterfly off her face. At the 2026 French Open, the fire dress for her first round win against Laura Sigmund, who told the press that I came here to play tennis, not to put on a fashion show. Yet she lost. So clearly she wasn't there for either of those things. At Wimbledon 2026, a robe by Hanayagi built from vintage bridal garments, entirely white, entirely compliant. You don't have to see the color of a kimono, she said afterward, to know that it's a kimono. As much as you'll like framing her as somebody who does not understand the sport, the truth is she's a player who understands its history and its relationship with fashion better than most people criticizing her. And we're about to edge into uncomfortable territory here because I need you to sit with the language itself, right? Osaka's critics call her classless, they call her too much, they call her a distraction, they say she's here for a fashion show. Her male counterparts, however, were labeled elegant, timeless. Whatever they were doing was a masterwork of personal branding. Even when they received some form of pushback, it's very mild. All Taylor's Hugo Boss suit got was a joke about copying. Nothing like the moral charge leveled at Osaka. It's the same too much aimed at Serena her whole career. Her body, her ambition, her cat suit, her tutu, her celebrations, her disappointments for winning, for existing at the volume that she occupied. These aren't old grievances. They're the direct antecedents of the conversation happening around Osaka right now. When critics call it attention-seeking, they aren't critiquing the clothes, I'd argue. They're objecting the audacity of a mixed-race black woman claiming that much space, that much visibility, that much creative ownership over one of the sport's grandest stages. Federer claimed that same space and got a Christie's auction and a GQ award. The difference was never in the act. It's in who's performing it. Osaka herself has said as much by saying that there's a demographic that's been talking about traditional tennis outfits and calling her classless for what she chooses to wear. She said that she sees it for what it is and she does not do it for them because they will never get it and she does not want them to. She does it for the people that are like her. That's somebody who gets the part where the sport's imagined default has always had a particular face in mind and hers has never been quite it. Every few months, Osaka walks into a court in something extraordinary and someone has something negative to say, but history does not remember the critics. I hate to break it to you, okay? It remembered the players moving the needle and it will remember Osaka the same way once everyone complaining about her has been filed under the same folder as everybody who complained about the players who came before her. Tennis isn't being invaded by fashion, you guys. It never was. In fact, tennis invaded fashion over a century ago and has never left. And that's why I say critics of today are losing the argument to a century of history, moving in a direction that they could never slow down because the court has always been a runway, and it always will be. And that is it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. I loved putting this together. Let me know all of your thoughts. Let me know your favorite tennis looks. Okay, some of the most iconic tennis looks that you've seen. Put them down below. And I hope to see you guys in the next one. Remember, if you do not slay, then you do not stay. And that's on period. Bye.